America's supply chain problems just got worse, as you now have the CEO of Coca-Cola and some executives from Amazon predicting the supply chain issues will drastically affect our holiday season this year. Companies are scrambling and getting creative about how they ship products and move products around the world, but they're saying that it might not be enough to ease consumer demand. This may ultimately hurt consumers' wallets, and some experts are saying to get your holiday shopping done now, because if you don't, there may not be any products left on the shelves when you go to buy. And just a reminder, it's not even November yet. So with inflation being at a record high and our supply chain being at a new low, I wanted to take a minute to discuss what is going on with our supply chains throughout the United States and the rest of the world. Are these supply chain issues going to continue and drastically affect our holiday season? And how long are they going to last for? Are supply chain issues just the way the world works now? Or is there a way out of this crisis? And more importantly, we'll take a look at what we're doing right now to alleviate some of this supply chain pressure. But before we get into all of that, my name is Nate from Minority Mindset News, and if you like this video, make sure to smash that thumbs up button below and hit that little notification bell too. That way YouTube shows our videos to way more money minds around the world, and we can keep making videos just like this one. The world has been facing supply chain issues for kind of a long time now. The pandemic essentially broke our supply chains, but supply chains were already struggling way before COVID-19. Essentially, when we refer to supply chains, we're talking about the delivering of goods and services throughout the world. The supply chain sometimes starts with the mining of a raw material for a product, then it moves on to the production of that product, and then finally, shipping. This essentially creates a chain so that companies can measure and track the success of their products, and they can actually see if the products are going to make it to the shelf or to your door in time. Chances are you've gone to the store or tried to purchase something online and you get that out of stock sign. Well, this is due to the supply chain issues going on right now. Like I said, supply chains have been stressed for a long time now. That stress creates less raw materials for people to actually create the goods from, and less drivers and workers to produce and then deliver those same products. Having this stress of raw materials and fewer workers to deliver and produce the products, companies are going to naturally have to increase their prices. This will ultimately lead to inflation in a variety of different industries. Companies have to have bigger places to store more goods. They also have to have more employees to create and deliver those same goods. More cargo ships to take the materials and ship them across sea, and then more drivers or captains to then move the products and deliver them to you. And the fact of the matter is, supply chains have been stressed for a very long time now. And the supply chain gets stressed even more during the holidays. More people want to buy even more things during this time, and with the stressed supply chain, it's hard to get all of those products to the consumers. This is one of the reasons why you see prices for goods so much higher during the holidays, when if you bought it 6 months earlier, you might not have paid that price tag. It's called seasonal inflation, and a lot of experts agree that if you just wait past the holidays to buy those same goods, the prices will ultimately go down. Part of the reason for this is the supply chain. But then in March of 2020, our supply chain essentially broke due to the pandemic. Some industries in the supply chain were hurt a lot more than others. It all just depended on what consumers were looking for at that time. It all depended on what demand was. Demand for something can definitely come and go. Like we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of people were moving from working in an office to working at home. And a lot of kids were moving from going to school to actually going to school from home. Millions of people doing this all at once can mean a sharp demand for electronics, specifically computers. And we saw this happen pretty much right away. And that led to the price of electronics going way up. And a lot of people started hoarding toilet paper, so we saw the price of that and demand go way up too. Those things eventually even out as you have the supply and demand eventually equal one another. This is called an equilibrium within the market. But if those things don't equal one another, then you'll start to see the price of an item reflect that. It may be super high depending on if a lot of people want it and there's not a lot of it, or it may be super low if there is a ton of that resource but nobody really wants it. It's not because people can't have it, it's It's because they don't want to buy it. They have the means, they just don't want it. But if people really, really want something, but it is super rare to get, the price is going to be super high. So why were supply chains immediately crushed back in March of 2020? Well, the first main reason for this is because pretty much everything shut down as soon as the pandemic hit. You had entire industries that could no longer work because of social distancing orders. Everything was pretty much put on pause for several months out of the year. And not everything in the supply chain went up right away. We saw gas prices hit record lows during this time. Nobody was really driving because nobody had to go to work. And because a lot of things were closed, nobody was really traveling either. Everyone was staying at home, so you began to see these stay-at-home companies doing really, really well. Entertainment boomed at this time. People were stuck at home, so they had to find something to do. So they turned to streaming like YouTube, Disney Plus, and HBO Max. We also saw a ton of other streaming services pop up during this time. In general, we saw tech as an industry boom. A lot of things could be done at home and they did not require people to meet face to face in order to get that business done. So while just about everything was affected by the supply chain issues, some things were affected in a positive way versus a negative way. But we also had a ton of different industries that just could not function on a day-to-day basis due to the pandemic. Restaurants and factories were the first to go. Restaurants specifically had to close indoor dining for a very long time due to health concerns. And with a ton of people working in close proximity at factories, they too had to shut down. Some industries that were deemed essential had to stay open, like grocery stores and energy. People have to eat and people have to be able to power their homes. If not, then the rest of society would crumble too. But one of the biggest things that contributed to our supply chain issues today is that demand never really faltered. Americans still needed to live during this time, and they couldn't have millions upon millions of people not receiving any paychecks. So the federal government decided to step in and provide stimulus to millions of Americans. Stimulus in just about every way, shape, or form. The first was financial stimulus. Americans were given thousands of dollars in stimulus checks that they could basically spend however they wanted to. Additionally, the federal government was giving even more money in unemployment insurance to people that were without a job. So if your industry basically shut down, you were getting extra money on top of the state unemployment that you'd normally get. Not only was there direct financial assistance, the federal government made it mandatory to postpone some key programs. The federal student loan program was paused, meaning anyone that had federal student loans was not required to make any payments, and no interest has accrued, and this has been going on since, well, March of 2020. And it's still going on even to this day and doesn't end until the end of January of 2022. Next up was the mortgage moratorium program. This meant that if you were not financially able, you did not need to make payments on your mortgage during this time. So what did this all lead to? Well, it led to Americans gaining a ton of money without having to work, and it led to Americans saving a ton of money because the federal government said they were not required to make payments on some programs. This stretched supply chains even more because demand was rising, but companies could not produce any more goods, not at a fast enough rate to meet demand. This whole process has gone on for well over a year now, and it's led us to where we are today. Inflation has increased by 5.9%. This is because companies cannot keep up with demand. They have to spend more on holding their supply, they have to spend more on employees, and they have higher delivery costs. But that has not been easy due to the Great Resignation. We're seeing millions upon millions of people leaving their jobs voluntarily in order to find better employers. This has led to one of the biggest labor shortages in our nation's history. I already made an entire video breaking this Great Resignation and labor shortage down, so if you want to check out that video, I will leave a link to it in the description below. But the bottom line here is that companies are running out of raw materials because demand is so high, and they can't actually ship and produce as many goods because they have a labor shortage. So now it is October of 2021, and what exactly are we doing about the supply chain problem? Well, the first thing the world is trying to do to resolve the supply chain problem is to just avoid it in the first place. Technology has been advancing for years, and in 2020 it really took off because of the demand for it. Companies are turning to automation. This means a lot of the products that are produced within factories are being done so by robots. That's pandemic and person-proof. Positions throughout the world are just being eliminated altogether and being replaced by technology. And in the long term, this will hopefully help avoid a labor shortage in the first place. But unfortunately, that doesn't really help us today. In order to solve this crisis sooner rather than later, companies are trying to step up as much as they can, offering workers better pay and better benefits. This will slowly start to draw in more employees that can then produce more materials, produce more items, and start to meet demand. Companies are also starting to move some of their materials closer to home, that way they can avoid delivery and production costs. This will help companies avoid those shipping delays overseas just so they can produce the item here. This will help companies avoid delays so that way they can begin shipping the product right from home. And this will most likely cost more for companies, but they'll just end up taking that cost and trickling it down to the consumers. What you pay for an item will most likely go up, but you won't have to wait as long as the item will no longer be delayed. The company can now keep up with demand. In addition, President Biden has made it mandatory for our major US ports to stay open for 24 hours straight until our supply chain issues have been resolved. This is because we're seeing hundreds of cargo ships waiting just to enter the ports and unload their materials, which has led to hours of extra waiting for cargo ships and then weeks of delays for consumers. And all of that is definitely helping, but it is not enough to keep up with the heightened demand of 2021. Some companies have even switched to delivering their products by air rather than through trucking. The only problem with this is that it's expensive, you can't hold as much on a plane, and the carbon emissions from planes have a significant impact on our climate change. So while it may be faster, it's not really economically feasible for companies and then consumers. This is why many companies are pushing consumers to shop now for their holiday items. If consumers shop now and buy the things that they need, they probably won't run into these supply chain issues later when pretty much everybody is going to try shopping. That will help alleviate some of the pressure on supply chains and keep prices low for consumers. So the biggest question is, when will these supply chain issues end? Well, nobody really knows the answer to this. Many experts believe that our current supply chain issues will last at least through the holidays and into 2022. We're just now seeing a lot of the government stimulus measures end, people going back to work in the office, and inflation continue to rise. All of these things may contribute to people buying less things. If people are buying less things, then supply chains can return to a somewhat normal. This is going to take time though, so while the world is working on some short-term and long-term solutions, these supply chain issues are not going away anytime soon. But now I want to hear from you on this issue. Do you think our supply chain issues are going to get worse in 2022? Or do you think our supply chains will return to normal next year? In addition, what are some things that you think could help our current supply chain problem? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below before you go. But that is it for today's business and financial news breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button below. Keep hustling, money minds, and I'll see you all in the next one.